So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. We're going to talk about rebooting your Agile team this morning. So just to start quickly, my name is Martin, or Martin, if you prefer, if it's easier for you. I'm an Agile coach back in Montreal, Canada. I've been coaching teams for a number of years now, and throughout the years, I've been able to work in. I was lucky to work in organizations with a very high potential for experimentation. I've mostly worked in Canada and in Europe as well. I remember joining my first Agile team, actually before it was called Agile, in the early 2001, working in extreme programming. So I believe I have a good extended experience working in the trenches with the team. And in my personal life, I'm doing triathlon, and I'm actually training really, really hard to my full distance Ironman next summer. And I'm also a proud father of an Agile family at home. So I do Scrum with my girls as well, and that's really popular. They love writing post-its. So now I'll pass the clicker to my colleague, Maurizio.
Thanks, Martin. And thanks everyone for coming to our presentation. So for myself, I've been practicing Agile Scrum for over 10 years in various organizations and really been refining my approach. Really my passion is to deliver quality software and also how to see how Agile Scrum can help teams deliver quality software. I'm also a frequent blogger on a number of sites. I've done a number of presentations over recent years, including a couple with my colleague Martin. And Martin and I have worked together in a number of organizations, and the largest transformation we did was an organization with 15 different dev teams, geographically dispersed, and a little bit of an older organization, so it took us a little while to get them there, but it took us about 3 years to complete that transformation. So as we all know, transformations do take time, right? In terms of the agenda, this is the agenda for today. And really the agenda reflects how Martin and I work together in organizations. And really we work at it from two different angles, from the executive coaching angle and from the team coaching angle. And so what I'll do in the presentation at the start, I'll show you how we lay the foundation of either an Agile transformation or a reboot. And then Martin will do a deep dive on a team level and how we then work with the teams to reboot the teams. Okay? And we're going to start by talking about organizational change and the effect of that on Agile transformation and vice versa. You can't really do Agile transformations without looking at organizational change. And I'll start by telling you a story of a customer that I was talking to about 4 months ago. And this customer was based in Miami. We were discussing how Agile Scrum could help his organization. And he asked me a question. And this question was a simple one. He says, well, can you help me just spin up some Agile teams? Just spin them up for me. And so whenever we hear that kind of a question from a customer, it's our first indication that we're dealing with a customer that's probably facing a challenge in the industry. And has probably realized, oh, I'm late to the game and I need to deal with some kind of challenge. And usually when you look at these organizations and you look a bit down, you'll see that their processes are pretty rigid and they don't deviate much. And they're not open to creativity. And if you look a little deeper into the teams, you'll see people using work processes. And you ask them, well, why are you doing that in your process? And you'll get the inevitable answer, well, that's just how we've always done it, right? And so when we start to talk to customers with these kinds of responses, we now know that our Agile transformation or deployment will be more challenging. So what I did to the customer, I answered them, I said, well, you just can't build mature Agile teams like that. It just doesn't happen overnight. It really does take some time to build a proper Agile team. And so what I suggested to the customer is, what about focusing on building one proper Agile team? Just like Jeff Sutherland said, right, this morning? And let's make that one proper team work properly. Let's get them to establish proper Agile practices. Let's show successful deliverables of this one team. And then we will take this one team and use that to promote across the organization. And really that's what Martin and I did with that organization that I talked to. We went one team at a time. It wasn't a big bang approach. So when it comes to organizational change, we'll get back to the topic, right? Organizations that don't get ready and aren't proactive end up in these problems where they ask for Agile Scrum to solve everything. And we feel it's better for them to be ready and proactive because change will inevitably happen in the world. And organizations that aren't proactive, you will then see that changes that are happening in the industry are happening much more rapid than what's happening inside the organization. So what ends up happening, you get this gap between the two, and then they're trying to fill that gap or trying to catch up. So organizational change is for companies is better for them to be ready and proactive. And if they're ready and they adapt, then they'll survive. And if they won't survive. And you can see many examples of companies over time that have disappeared. For example, Kodak was one of the companies that was an industry leader not that long ago. And if you look today, it exists in name only, right? It just didn't survive. So organizational change is important. They need to be proactive. And one of the concepts that we work with the companies, we work on a concept called creative destruction. And this concept comes from the world of economics. And in one sentence, what it means is it's the art of an organization renewing itself from within. Now, what does that mean? It sounds great. But basically, it means that when an organization becomes too set in its ways, it's at that point it needs to realize that it needs to innovate and change and stay ahead of the game. And so we use creative destruction techniques inside of the teams as we reboot. And Martin will get into that a little bit later. So now if we look across the historical waves of innovation, we see that the creative destruction cycles are actually getting much, much shorter. And the curve of innovation is actually getting much more pronounced. So what does that mean? It means that changes are happening quickly. And Jeff showed us a number of them at the keynote this morning, right? So when we enter an organization, we know that organizational change is not easy, but we feel organizations need to start looking at changes by thinking of the principle of simplicity. A lot of organizations take on change with these big, complex initiatives. But we tell our organizations, you should start with small, simple steps rather than these big initiatives. And we feel that companies can actually learn something from Leonardo da Vinci. And he captured it best when he said, la semplicità è la più grande sofisticatezza. Or in English, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And so we feel that Leonardo was onto something. Or maybe he was inspired by his mom and her great cooking. Now, anybody that knows Italian cuisine knows that an true Italian recipe only has 5 or 6 ingredients. And if anybody tells you they have an Italian recipe with more than 5 or 6 ingredients, it's not a true Italian recipe. Trust me, I know. I am Italian, in case you're wondering. But as many of us know, as much as we can have that recipe in hand, somehow when we go to execute that recipe, it just doesn't come the same, right? It's just not like when mom made it. It doesn't have the same taste. Something is missing in that recipe. So when it comes to cooking, you start with a simple recipe. You start with those 5 or 6 ingredients. And we feel this applies for Agile as well. However, the secret is not so much in the recipe, but in how you execute the recipe. And this is why you see across the Agile landscape, everybody claiming, well, we got the recipe for Agile. And yet there's dead bodies everywhere on the Agile landscape, right? So when Martin and I start a transformation, we start with simple rules. We never overcomplicate it. And we start with essential ingredients. And for us, it starts with 6 essential ingredients. Now, the ingredients you're going to hear about are not your standard ingredients that you may have heard at other talks. But if these ingredients are not properly planned and used, then usually the Agile recipe doesn't go well. And we'll start with the first one, which is leadership. So we feel you need leadership at all levels of an organization. And whenever Martin and I work with an organization, we start with executive coaching. And we actually start with a 2-day reboot training session in which we sit with the executive and we actually teach them at a high level what Agile is. And then we tell them how the teams will work at a high level. But most importantly, we make sure we get the point across to them of how important it is for them to support the Agile transformation. So that's where we start. Then we move on to team coaching. And in the team coaching, we look to develop some leadership. And we know that in Agile, it's all about the self-organizing team, but it does not mean that you don't need any management. It just means you're going to need a different style of management, and there'll probably be a few people that will help with the management. Hence, the next ingredient is management style. In management style, I'll talk about Management 3.0, which was a concept from Jürgen Appello. A number of you probably already know it. And his definition is as simple as, it's the future of management, which is all about doing the right thing for your team, involving everyone in improving the system, and fostering employee engagement. And you'll notice that a lot of what he says there are actually the same principles that we need to do an Agile transformation. So, you now have your leadership, you've got your management style, you've got to set the next ingredient, which is the vision of the product. So in the vision, why is the vision essential? Well, without a vision for your product you're working on, then how do you know what your team is going to deliver, right? And so so I know this sounds, cliche, right? You need a vision for your product. But you'd be surprised how many teams we've seen where they're just working on stuff just to do tasks. They're closing bugs, they're writing features that never get used, right? And they just work without that vision. And in Agile, the vision is that much more important because of the speed you execute things. The deliverables are frequent in Agile. The business needs are changing quickly, right? You're trying to keep up with that organizational change that's happening in the industry, right? You need a vision for what the teams need to work on because it'll keep them focused and making sure they're delivering the right business value. So we now have our vision, and you now need to start communicating that vision to everyone so that you can get employee engagement in your vision that you've set for the product. And the employee engagement, we look at it at all the levels, right? We look for management participation. We look for these motivated team members, right? We look for people that take responsibility. And we promote a culture of change. And again, you need engagement at all these levels if Agile is going to work. Because then when you're doing Agile, you don't have time to be a tourist on the product bus. Okay? There's just no time. All right, so now we got engagement, and now we get to the essential ingredient that I think has to be there, which is quality, which is my passion, right? And I'm going to talk about building in quality. What does that mean? So building in quality means you're building quality into the recipe. At every stage of the recipe, you're looking at quality. Without a proper quality strategy, your team cannot develop a good cadence because you will inevitably get into the quality quagmire, which I'm going to show you in a second, right? And so quality to me is an essential ingredient, and actually in the Agile Scrum Guide, it says it's one of the things you need to look at. When I talk about quality, I'm talking about quality. If this is what your quality looks like, how many people it looks like this? Where the development starts, and QA starts a bit behind, and QA is always 1 or 2 sprints behind. If that's what you're doing, that's not building in quality. Because building in quality is focused on defect prevention and not defect detection. And so what it means is that you're building and testing and building within a sprint. It is so key, such a key ingredient. If you don't have that, I can't see how you'll do proper Agile Scrum. Right? So we have quality. We're into our last ingredient, the most important, the chef, or our Agile coach. It is the Agile coach that will then know how to use the previous 5 ingredients and will know how to make them successful and spice up the recipe so that you can make your team successful. So now we're all set. We have our 6 essential ingredients and we're ready to do a reboot. We've engaged management, we've developed leadership, we've communicated that vision out, we've developed engagement and equality strategy, and we have our amazing Agile coach. Let me just do a quick survey of the room. So now you know all the 6 ingredients. How many people have either on a project now or have had a project where all 6 ingredients are a problem? Nobody?
Or a problem?
Are a problem. Yeah, a problem. Like really, they don't, they're not good. How many people have had at least 3 ingredients that aren't good? And how many have had at least 1 ingredient? So the reason I ask you this is because from our experience, even if one of these ingredients is not right or is just a little off, your Agile deployment or reboot usually doesn't go well. But it's great that we've talked about ingredients, but we cannot forget we're dealing with humans, and humans are complex creatures, so there's a special dimension you need to keep in mind, and Martin will tell you about this special dimension.
So like Maurizio mentioned, humans are complex creatures. And when I get called into an Agile intervention or coaching, what I'm being asked is actually to create some magic or recreate the magic. To be able to do this, I need to push people out of the comfort zone. And when we push people out of the comfort zone, well, obviously we're messing up with feelings. People are getting emotional, and because change is actually difficult. And so we have to acknowledge that in this change process, people are really going to be having some emotion, and we need to make sure that we build this into our reboot process. As an Agile coach, I put a lot of interest into the emotional intelligence. This is something I found very important because it's not well known, and we know that people are actually, like I said, going to experience a lot of feelings. And one of the key takeaways I take from the emotional intelligence is that we have to actually acknowledge those emotions. We have to make sure that they don't remain hidden. And so obviously we want to generate the positive emotions during the change or even after, but for sure we're going to have the negative emotions popping up. And those negative emotions are going to kill your effectiveness. Or they can kill the effectiveness of the current team, or they can kill the effectiveness of the actual reboot of the team. So we have to be conscious and aware that it's there. And again, like working with people, it's fooling up with their feelings. So the issue is not whether employees have negative emotions, but rather how we're going to be addressing them. Okay, so as a coach, we need to be aware that they're there, and we need to put in place a mechanism to address those feelings and emotions. So now if we look a minute at this iceberg, Maurizio and I decided to put our ingredients at the top, at the visible part of the iceberg. Underneath water, the emotions. The emotions are often a taboo in organizations, and we don't want to talk about them. And when we're trying to get the teams going, or we're trying to implement the change, then we understand that change is hard and change is difficult. But without noticing or actually taking ownership of managing those emotions and making sure that the upper management is understanding and being part of this, then it's going to be a difficult process. So we strongly believe that the change needs to be driven from the top. It needs to be a strong management commitment to the change. But we believe that working on strong roots for the teams are going to be able to help the team flourish. So now this is very abstract. Now we're going to get into more very more concrete, like how we reboot the teams. So if you notice, I added some colors there because it represents a bit the Italian flag. So in a previous session, somebody asked me like, why would you want to reboot the team? Like, what are the reasons why you want to reboot an Agile team? Well, maybe because the team, Jeff Solomon was talking a bit about it this morning. Maybe your team is Agile. Having a design phase, a development phase, a testing phase. Maybe the implementation from the beginning was wrong. Maybe the thing is fragile, meaning you're having the traditional and you just map the Scrum layer on it. So people are just using Scrum terminologies, but without really applying the real agility. Or maybe it's even fragile. We actually did real Agile, but we're not delivering anymore, and we don't understand why. So, common causes, the backlog is a total mess. Thousands of elements or items in the backlog. We don't know where to look anymore. You can get, in Jira, like boards like this with 15 columns, and it's a total mess. People cannot find themselves each other, anymore. Project managers are filling the role of the Scrum Master. The teams are huge. A QA team behind, multiple sprints behind the dev teams. Stand-ups are like status reports. Sprint planning taking forever, taking days. And they're not even clear on what they need to accomplish or the actual outcome of the planning. So now that brings me, so these are like reasons why we need to do some reboot on the Agile team. So now that brings me to the 5 steps. So over the time, I actually coach a great number of teams, and there's a pattern. It takes me about 5 sprints to reboot a team. And I'm going to go through these 5 sprints. So in sprint 1, we called it run in the rain. Well, why run in the rain? It's because the team is feeling that they're fighting against the elements. It's always raining, and it's not pleasant. The group had some success in the past. It's maybe a team that used to work together in the past. But for some reason, there's a lot of frustration. The deliveries are not happening anymore. So we need to find why it's not working. So in this first sprint, the coach has to come in. So when I come into the team, first thing is I make sure that I don't make any changes in this first sprint. I need to spend time with the team, feel the pain. Feel the pain with them, understanding what they're going through. So listening a lot to the different people, different team members, make sure that we meet everyone. And then, like I said, we need to understand why it's always raining. So what's causing those problems? Like, why, again, isn't it working? So one thing I like doing, and I think it's very effective, is actually doing a survey at the beginning. So I do an online survey, and I question people, a very short survey, on the different Agile dimensions to see where they stand in terms of implementation of all this. And because it's an anonymous survey, well, people are also giving me some feedback, anonymous feedback. So that's pretty cool because it's helping understanding the dynamic and what needs to be fixed. So after I gather that data, I'm able to create some radar here to see what are the axes that we need to address. More technical, more product, more organization, more communication. Here on this example, like it's more in the middle, so everything needs to be worked out. In this first sprint, so once we start understanding what's happening, we want to start building a change roadmap. And I'm trying to avoid, I have plan in the middle, but the plan, we need to iterate through the plan. And here, my big inspiration for this is actually the lean change management from Jason Little. That inspired me a lot in terms of setting up a good framework for dealing with a change. So we want to define this roadmap. We want to make sure to communicate this roadmap to the team, to the organization. And we want to start via the communication to build the trust, because often the trust is something broken or something missing when we need to do that reboot. So we need a lot of vision when we're training, when we're doing this, because again, we're going to communicate to the team or the teams the vision. Then in sprint 2, we called it Thunderstruck. This is where we need a lot of courage, because this is where we're going to start actually applying some changes. We're going to break the status quo. And breaking the status quo, what does it mean? Well, multiple times when I joined the teams, it depends on the team, but often I got, we're already Agile, Martin, like, why are you coming here? But the thing is, it's not working. So we need to start building common vocabulary. So, and this is done via training. If we leave just the people to do whatever they want, self-organizing doesn't mean do whatever you want. So we need to build this common understanding of what are the concepts, what are the practices we're going to use together. There's a lot of practices in Agile, so what are they? And let's make sure we master them properly. So then I'm going to start applying the creative destruction concept that Maurizio was talking about a bit earlier. This is where I start to reinvent the backlog. So I'm sitting down with product people, product owners, because sometimes it's all messed up. Need to sit down with those people, and if Jira is like a total mess, we're going to go on the wall with Post-its. We're going to step back, rebuild the backlog. So we need to reinvent the backlog. Everything starts with the backlog. You can have the best Scrum Master in the world, but if your backlog is garbage, it's garbage in, garbage out. That's what's happening. So work on the backlog. We're going to start changing the way we communicate together. So I bring my painter state. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. And then I spot the empty walls in the office, and I start building physical Scrum boards on the wall. So I want to start building this collaboration and this communication with the teams. So we're going to make it visible. And last thing is, we're going to create also our definition of done. When we work on user stories, we're going to make sure we have the same understanding what it means to be done with a story. That's often a big problem, because when we say it's done and it's not done, then what's happening is at the end we end up trying to deploy stories, and it was 99% done. That's a big issue, because this is creating unexpected work. So that's very crucial in our creative destruction. Make sure that we bring back the concept of completing the work. Then we want to find the motivated individuals. I love using Legos, because every time I bring the Legos to work, people are actually becoming back kids, and they're having fun, and they actually open up. So that's helping me a lot to find the creative people and the future champions for the initiative. Still in this sprint, this is where, like I was saying at the beginning, we do training. So I have my Reboot class that I do with the teams. And we need to manage the negative emotions, because people, they're not sure they want to change, they don't feel like it's right or whatever. There's multiple reasons. So what I do is, obviously, yes, we create a common understanding, we build a common vocabulary, but I do a lot of team activities. And this is creating a lot of good interaction. For example, here, we're working on the product box. So we're working on what's the vision. What is this product for? We're not just doing software. We're actually delivering value to the company. So we bring back the notion of value through the product. And I bring cereal box, and actually people are creating designs on it and presenting their product. So we're bringing back the product into the team. Here, it's a little activity that I do. It's called Draw the Drawing. It's actually, we're practicing the communication process. We're showing with a lot of specs, it's actually becoming longer or more difficult to deliver the right product. So actually here on the card, this is done by 3 people, for example, and the first is the product owner. He's creating a simple drawing. So here it's the Eiffel Tower. And then there's a person in the middle that will write, once the design, the graphic is done, hands up the graphic to the second person, will write instructions on how to reproduce that design. And then the third person gets the instruction and he's asked to actually draw the thing on the whiteboard. So you see it creates really, really interesting product. It's not actually what the product owner was asking at the beginning. So that's a strong exercise that shows the team that writing simple user stories and having a lot of communication face-to-face is the best ingredient to make sure that we're close as possible to what we need to develop with the team. And obviously we need to find what are the anchors, what's blocking the team. So in the training, there's a lot of team activities like this that we do. In Sprint 3, so far we didn't start a coding sprint. So in Sprint 3, this is really where we start a machine, and we called it the M&M pain machine. So the team feels like they're crossing the desert. It's very painful, because now we're changing the way we work. I remember a team where they were all working on all stories at the same time. They were never delivering anything because everybody was owning a story, and it was never done at the end of the sprint. With that team, I forced them to work only on 2 stories at a time. And actually, in the first sprint, it was 1 story. So they had to fight. And they were really, really unhappy with the process at the beginning. So they really felt the crossing the desert. Martin, your process sucks. This is terrible. We hate it. We hate you. But the thing is, after they crossed the desert, and by the way, there's one tool that I found that is really creating some cool dynamic, is having an M&M machine at my desk. So I have regulars, and so other people are passing to the desk, and they're taking their sugar dose regularly. And while they're taking their sugar dose, they're sharing their emotions, they're sharing their thoughts, they're sharing their ideas. And this is creating something, while you're going through the pain, actually people can continue to share together. In this first sprint, the team will fail. And the faster they fail, the better. So we need to start, quitting this Superman syndrome right away, as soon as possible. And the faster we fail, the faster we get back on track. So we need to show that, if you're not buying into, working on small user stories, working together, have a good collaboration, and delivering working software, then we're going to fail. And we need to, in this process, assess what are our strengths and weaknesses. So you need a good, either Scrum Master or coach, to do good retrospective with the team to understand why we're failing. So we get this load of emotion in this third sprint because, everybody's proud and nobody likes to fail. But the faster you fail again, the better you're going to be doing after. So then what do we need to do to make sure that we get back on track? So in this third sprint, we need to work with the product owner to better plan, to better organize the product backlog. We need small stories. Split them efficiently. Splitting stories actually and writing stories is a bit of an art, but it needs to be mastered. Again, garbage in, garbage out. So we need to plan appropriately. We need to mentor the Scrum Master to make sure that he understands that the role is not command and control. It's about leading, serving leadership. There you go. And we need to make sure that the team is collaborating so that they are working on stories together. They're not picking each their own story and working in silos, that the work is being done together. And actually the QA and the quality is being done together as well. Work in progress. Again, many teams are actually working on all the things at the same time because everything is important. That's very wrong. So we need to limit the work in progress. That's a very, very key factor, and that's always very painful to put in place. Limit the work in progress. So we need to be careful of those fragile temptation right away in this third sprint, because people will try to go back right away to the command and control or the complex user stories or stand-ups that are just lasting way too long. So what we want here is remove complexity, remove everything that is too long, too complex, and again focus on simplicity. So in sprint 3, the team really suffered, they failed, and I would say having the experience of rebooting a good, maybe, 20 to 30 teams, generally in sprint 4, this is where the team says, like, okay, we have enough, we failed, we're miserable, now it's time to do better. So the team naturally will emerge and will turn the page. And this is where, we're crossing the edge. And this is where the team is actually morphing into something that generates some fun and some passion. The team will start building working software. Oh, at the end of the sprint, we have a story that works. Maybe we don't have 10 stories, but maybe we have a few stories that works, that we can deliver. Whoa, small success. That's great. Let's build on that. Build in quality within. In that third sprint, something I didn't mention often is, well, I don't do QA, I'm a dev. That's something I hear all the time. So they learn that quality is owned by everyone. Maurizio was talking about quality. We build in quality. So here they understand that they succeed as a group, they fail as a group. That's a strong concept that they need to master here in this fourth sprint. And the trust is starting to emerge in the team. The team needs to have fun. Here, it's actually a mature team that I had the chance to coach. The product owner was back from vacation, and little surprise was waiting for her. And that team was very good, self-organizing. So that's a very maturing team. Here it's a team that I actually also worked with in a major bank in Canada. That team learned to split the work into very small pieces. So by splitting the work in small pieces, testing it as a group, delivering constantly, frequently, they were able to get rapid feedback from their client internally. That made them very successful very quickly. Having the feedback and feeling that the client was happy about the work that was done there increased the maturity level and bound the team together very quickly. We want to make this visible. So we're using Windows. Here's an example of product owner doing release planning, story mapping, and refinement sessions in the Windows there. And it's creating a very dynamic environment where the management can be involved as well. They're participating into this planning. They see the whole thing. We can make decisions. We can decide where to cut. That was the first stage. I also added lines after. I said everything after the first line is not doable in the first sprint. The first release. Then they had to start making choices, but everything was visible, understood, and accepted. So release planning, story mapping, very efficient tool for the team. Then we get to sprint 5, remove the training wheels. The team is starting to master the tools, master the techniques. Here it's a team that I work with. At the end of the sprint, they were done ahead of time. The work was done much, much faster. That's something Jeff Sutherland was talking about this morning. When we do the right things, it goes faster, for real. Then we need to start training the next team. So we need to start spreading that knowledge. So when we have one good team, we need to start training the other teams in the organization based on the same model. But be careful, not to compare the teams between each another because you're going to create problems in the organization. They're not necessarily at the same level, dealing with the same problems. So if you say, oh, that team is doing, I don't know, 50 points, and you're only doing 30 points, that's going to create a problem. So that's something really to avoid. Here, that's a concept I thought that I invented, but Jeff was showing this morning the Meta Scrum. Well, that's my Meta Scrum. That was about 2 years ago with the team of product owners. Everybody had different teams, different features. So we created this big Kanban board on the wall. Everybody had their features there, and the product owner were actually syncing together to make sure that we created the right thing. So a bunch of mature teams working together. We want to make this viral, and we're going to organize sessions. So I do lean coffee, in the organization to make sure that we can discuss those topics. And then I pass back the clicker to my colleague.
All right. Well, thanks, Martin, for that great deep dive. So, as you can see, it is possible to reboot any team in just 5 sprints. It has been done, but you need a plan. So the plan, you need to get it organized. And so what Martin and I have done is developed a transformation canvas for you. And this transformation canvas will be available on our websites afterwards. And the canvas has 2 pages. And really the front of the page, you can actually use it to go in and look at your teams and see and do sort of a health check on whether you need a reboot. Because maybe you feel you don't need a reboot. And along the top of the canvas is the 5 ingredients that we talked about. This is the scale that we suggest you use. And the bottom of the canvas is really your product dimensions. From the product definition all the way to the deliverable. The second side of the canvas is a visual representation. At the base of the model is all 6 of the ingredients that we talked about. Of course, we don't forget about our emotions that Martin talked about. And really, the model itself shows that sprint 1 and 2 are the ones where you're going to have difficulty. When you get to sprint 3, that's the inflection point. That's where if you can get over that hump, then you can become successful or you slip back. So this model is there and will be available. So some key takeaways from the presentation: 6 ingredients essential to any Agile deployment or reboot. Let's not forget about the emotions. And remember that people don't really resist change per se, but they resist the effect of change on them, right? And of course, you need a modern management style. You can't keep managing Agile teams with the old way of doing management, right? And have a plan. Make sure you figure out your plan, you execute on the plan, and you follow your plan. But let's not forget simplicity. We started with it, we're going to finish with it. Commit to deliver as a team, even if it means delivering a sprint of 1 working story. Start with that and build on it. And stay with the basics, right? You're there to deliver working quality software, and you're there to answer the questions of who, what, and why you're doing the software. But through all of this, you've got to discover the 5th Agile value. Have fun at work beyond following the recipe. That's it. Any questions?